So for the last year or so, Zack, who I've mentioned before, has compiled and curated almost every single story that you've heard on my channel. He's the one that painstakingly finds these stories and helps rewrite them in a easier fashion and better way for me to actually read them and be legible. And it makes my life a lot easier just to sit down and read and narrate and edit and do all that stuff rather than having to search and search and search for stories and hope to find good ones. He's an award-winning author. So on top of just, doing what he does for me on Booze and Booze, he writes books himself. And recently he launched his own book company, which was Braced Books. It's a huge milestone for him, obviously. Not only is he, an author, he's a father, a husband, and now he's launched his own book company, Braced Books. Cooperating with Kickstarter's Make 100 program, Braced Books is excited to offer a limited number series of hardcover editions of Hibernator, which I talked about a few months ago about him launching this book along with a few other authors. It's Braced Books' first annual anthology. It's a seasonal horror. It also obtained the #1 slot in the new releases in American horror on Amazon and was also nominated for the first Haunted Minds Book Award. For $30 plus shipping, you can get your own hard copy of Hibernator. Now, this is only available for 100 people to pre-order, and this opportunity also ends on January 31st. So I myself will be picking up one, and I think you should too. Let's help support the guy who helps keep this channel alive with stories and thriving in the way it is and keeps me, sane, because I don't know how much content I would legitimately be able to put out. It definitely wouldn't be 2 episodes a week if I didn't have Zack. So it would mean a lot to him, and it would definitely mean a lot to me if you guys will not only support me, but support the man behind the scenes. So please, if you have the money, if you have the means, please go pre-order a hard copy of Hibernator. I know I will be doing so. And yeah, that is it. I'll have all the links and everything, obviously, per usual, in the description, and I'll more than likely pin it in the comment section as well, just for easy access. All right, let's get into the stories now. When I was in my 20s, I worked as a prep cook inside a bustling family-owned restaurant. It was tucked between a strip mall and a department store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a paycheck and a stepping stone to something better, or at least that's what I continued to tell myself. The place had its quirks, like walls covered with faux rustic decor and a CD player that literally played the same 3 Italian CDs on repeat. But it was mine, my first real long-term job, my first taste of financial independence. Those early days were really tough. Learning the rhythm of a kitchen felt like trying to keep up with a drum line while blindfolded. Orders would shout over the sizzle of the grill, metallic clatter of pots and pans, a constant hum of voices. It was chaos, but after a few months, the chaos started to make sense to me. I could dice onions without tearing up, and my pasta boils were down to the second now. Before I knew it, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And the money got better because I knew my stuff. Spiffs here and there and a little extra cheddar in my paycheck from the boss on those holiday weekends. It was nice to just be appreciated. By the time I got promoted to head prep cook, I knew every inch of that kitchen. It wasn't just the cooking. I handled inventory, placed orders, managed the other cooks. I even made friends. And not the kind you invite to your wedding, but the kind you'd split a beer with after work and complain about Chef Martin's temper tantrums. You know the kind. And, well, that's when Chris showed up. Chris was the new bartender, hired to replace Dave, who'd gotten himself fired after a particularly dramatic meltdown involving a tray of martinis and a screaming match with the hostess. Chris was tall, dark-haired, and broad-shouldered. He had an easy grin that put people at ease. When we first met, he shook my hand and said, "Chris, huh? Guess that makes 2 of us." It was like looking in a mirror. Because, well, I'm also dark-haired and broad-shouldered. At first, it was just one of those funny coincidences. We shared a name and, weirdly enough, a small resemblance, and not a perfect match by any means. His hair was shorter and neater, his face was clean-shaven, but occasionally would make people double-take. "You guys look like brothers," one of the servers said, laughing. We played into it, joking about being long-lost twins. But truth be told, I'm actually 6 or 7 years older. He was like the boyish version of me. For a while, it was completely harmless. Chris was pretty charming, quick with jokes, and a good hit with the regulars. We'd exchange head nods across the kitchen. Occasionally, he'd swing by the prep station and bum a slice of bread or just chat about the latest disaster inside the restaurant. Not long after this, though, things just started to feel off. It was just little things at first. I'd catch him in the back of the house wearing one of my aprons, the hem smudged with the telltale streaks of my station. "Oh, thought it was mine," he'd say with a sheepish grin. Or I'd hear him introducing himself to a vendor as Chris the prep cook. His voice pitched just enough to be like mine and almost make me stop in my tracks. It was really bizarre, and I thought maybe it was just in my head, but even the others were catching on. I guess we thought it was some kind of weird joke that he was playing. So I just shrugged it off. Kitchens are chaotic places, it's easy to mix things up. But the longer he continued to work there, the more these little mix-ups would pile up and pile up, each one of them gnawing at the edges of my mind like rats inside the wall. It wasn't just the name or the apron. It was the way he just stood far too close to me when he talked, his eyes locked into mine like he was studying my face. The way he mimicked my laugh, my mannerisms, even the way I leaned against the countertops during breaks. This guy was doing everything the same way that I did, to the point it was like masking. People didn't really seem to notice anymore. Sometimes they'd even confuse him for me. It was really bizarre. Then one day I found him standing in the walk-in cooler, holding my name tag in his hand. "Did you lose yours or something?" I asked. He looked up almost mocking me. "Something like that," he said, tucking the name tag into his pocket. I raised my eyebrow. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. At first, again, I would just brush it off. Chris was weird, sure, but weird people are a dime a dozen in the restaurant world. It's almost a job requirement at this point. Maybe this guy just lacks some kind of boundaries. Maybe he's socially awkward in ways that didn't come across the right way. I would continue to tell these things to myself over and over, hoping they drown out that gnawing unease that started to follow me around like a shadow. But Chris made it impossible to ignore him. And it wasn't long before people really started to take notice. One of our servers, Anna, cornered me in the break room one day. "You know he's pretending to be you, right?" she said, her voice low like she didn't want anybody else to overhear. I stared at her, completely caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" She shifted uncomfortably and glanced towards the door. "Last night, he came into the bar where I was hanging out with some of my friends. He told everybody that he was Chris, the prep cook. Even started talking about inventory and how much he hates slicing onions." My stomach dropped. "Really? Are you sure?" "I'm positive," she said. "It's really weird. He even sounded like you, which made it even creepier." On the surface, I just laughed it off, but inside, I was starting to unravel. That night, I lie awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling and replaying Anna's words over and over in my head. The idea of somebody walking around and pretending to be me, adopting my lifestyle like it was a costume? Weird. The next day, I made an attempt at least, to confront him. "Hey," I said when I saw him, catching him by the dish station during a lull in the service. "We need to talk." He smiled, wiping his hands on a towel. Yeah, what's up, twin?" "Alright, cut the twin stuff," I snapped. "I heard you were at the bar last night telling people that you were me. What is all this about, dude? Like, what is this?" Chris tilted his head in a smile and wavering. "Aw, come on, it's just a joke." "Was it?" I said, folding my arms, because Anna didn't seem to think it was that funny. His grin faltered for a fraction of a second and then he just shrugged. "You're overthinking it, man. Relax." Relax. That word seemed to echo in my head almost like a taunt. I tried to take that at face value, but it was really impossible. Every time I turned around, there was Chris, watching me with that same grin. One afternoon, I opened up the fridge to grab my lunch, a Tupperware container of leftover spaghetti my girlfriend had made for me, only to find him leaning up against the counter, twirling my fork between his fingers. "Hey," he said, flashing that same empty smile. "This had my name on it. I thought it was mine. My bad." I froze. My hands were now clenching in a fist at my side. "That wasn't yours," I said. He shrugged, popping a forkful of spaghetti into his mouth right in the moment. "Huh. Well, it tastes like it's mine." Something in me snapped and I grabbed the fork out of his hand, slammed it onto the counter. "Stay the hell out of my stuff," I growled. Chris then held up his hands in this mocking surrender, his grin never faltering. "Oh, all right. No need to get all worked up." Worked up? Relax. This guy was easily trying to gaslight me into thinking that I was the crazy one, when in fact, it was him. After that, I started warning people. "Don't listen to anything Chris says," I told the other prep cooks. He's not right. There's something about this dude. I can't quite put my finger on it, but just don't listen to anything he says. But the harder I continued to try to distance myself from him, the closer he seemed to get to me. Then came the text to my girlfriend's phone. At first, I thought they were from me, messages that said things like, "Good morning," or "What should we have for dinner tonight?" But then when she showed them to me, I frowned. "I never sent these," I said. "What do you mean?" she asked me. "Shit, I guess they are from a number I don't recognize, but who else would text me stuff like this if it wasn't you?" I didn't even have to say anything. I knew who it was already. That night, I decided it was time to confront Chris once and for all. When I got to work, however, I found out that he'd called in sick. That idea of him sitting at home, probably scrolling through my girlfriend's social media or plotting his next move, just made my skin crawl. When I got home, I was still really on edge. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows set my nerves on fire. My girlfriend constantly tried to reassure me, but I could tell that she was uneasy as well. And then came a knock at the door. It was soft at first, almost like they were hesitating, but it was enough to send my heart racing. My girlfriend quietly went to the door, peeking through the peephole. "It's him," she whispered. And I didn't think, I just acted. I yanked open the door and there he was, Chris, standing on my porch with that same damn grin. "Hey, buddy," he said, like we were old friends. "I was in the neighborhood. I thought I'd stop by and say hi." "Hi." Before he could say another word, I shoved him hard. He stumbled back and tripped over the porch steps and landed in a heap on the sidewalk. "If you ever come near me or my girlfriend again, I'll fucking kill you. Do you understand me?" Chris didn't respond the way I had expected him to. He didn't shout back. He didn't threaten me. He just did that stupid smile, slowly got to his feet and brushed himself off. All right, he said, voice still extremely calm. "I'll see you around." Chris didn't show up for his shift the next day, or the day after that. By the end of the week, the general manager casually mentioned that he'd quit without any kind of notice. "Flaked out on us," she said with a shrug. "Guess he wasn't cut out for this after all." For a while, I was relieved. That oppressive weight of his presence was finally gone. The knot in my stomach had finally loosened. It was over. Chris had moved on and I could finally put this whole thing behind me. But unfortunately for me, Chris was hard to shake. A few weeks after this, my girlfriend and I were out running errands when I caught a glimpse of him, or at least somebody I thought looked like him. We were pulling into the parking lot of a grocery store. I saw a figure leaning up against the wall near the entrance, head bowed as if studying his phone. It was that posture that got me at first, that lazy slouch stance that I'd seen so many times inside the restaurant. "Hey, wait here," I told my girlfriend. She grabbed my arm though. "Don't, just let it go, please." But I couldn't. I got out of the car and walked toward him. Every step felt like it was getting heavier, like I was wading through molasses. By the time I got close enough to call out, he lifted his head and it wasn't him. The stranger gave me this puzzled look before turning and walking into the store. I stood there, breathing hard and feeling like an idiot. "See," my girlfriend said when I got back to the car. "You're letting him live in your head rent-free. Just let it go." She wasn't wrong, but it wasn't that simple. It wasn't just the memory of Chris that continued to haunt me. It was, well, the way he slipped into my life so seamlessly. The way he bent reality around him until it almost seemed like I was the intruder on him. Even now, many years later, I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see Chris in a crowd of faces. I don't think it's paranoia, it feels more like instinct. Something about that guy just wasn't right. Something that was way deeper than the usual weirdness of a restaurant life. I continued to rationalize it, explain it away, but maybe he was in fact lonely, desperate for some form of connection. Maybe he did see something in me that he wanted for himself. Or maybe he wasn't just pretending to be me, maybe he was actually trying to become me. That night on the porch when I shoved him down the stairs, I feel like I saw something in his eyes that I can't forget. It wasn't anger, fear, or even humiliation. It was satisfaction, like he was getting exactly what he wanted. I don't know where Chris is now still, and I really don't want to know. But sometimes when the house is quiet and the shadows stretch long across my walls, I think about that stupid empty smile, the way it never quite reached his eyes, and I wonder if Chris is still out there, telling some other group of people that his name is Chris and that he's a prep cook. I used to think of my work as this sanctuary, believe it or not. Sure, it was this big corporate grind, but it had its perks. I worked for IT for this massive company. It spanned multiple buildings and housed so many employees that some of the faces almost were a blur to me. I knew most of the departments, but still there were a lot of folks that I barely even recognized. People whose names I never even learned. For all I knew, some of them might have been ghosts haunting the break rooms and the copy machines. My days would fall into this comfortable rhythm. Come in, clock in, drink the coffee that tasted faintly of burnt toast, and deal with the same endless parade of forgotten passwords and mysteriously broken printers. Then, lunch, my sacred hour. I'd retreat to the break room or the little outdoor seating area with that same eclectic crew. A graphic designer named Tracy, an HR guy named Max, and Melanie from sales, who always had these wild stories about her clients. They were pretty much my buffer against the monotony. Routine kept the days manageable though. Even the constant hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the ever-present whir of the server room because of that background noise. The chaos of IT didn't really bother me too much. In fact, I kind of thrived on it. If anything, it's the unpredictable human drama that sometimes spilled into the office that would give me pause. People are strange creatures. You think you really know somebody, sitting right next to you day after day, week after week, year after year, and then something happens. A raised voice in the hallway, a slammed door, and suddenly they're a complete stranger. It was on one of those otherwise remarkable afternoons that the strange energy in the air hit me immediately. I was elbow deep in some kind of outdated desktop tower when I noticed the quiet. Normally, it wasn't loud or anything, but the office had this low din of conversation. phones ringing, keyboards clacking, but for some reason not today. Today there was something different. A tension that I couldn't quite place was lingering in the air. Tracy was always the one cluing me in, pulling me aside during my lunch break, their usual conspiratorial grin. "You hear about that drama?" she whispered, leaning in close enough that I could smell that peppermint gum that she was always chewing. Drama?" I'd asked, pretending not to care, but of course I cared. The office gossip was almost like a shot of caffeine. "Nicole, in accounting?" Tracy's eyes darted around, scanning for anybody eavesdropping. "She found out her husband's been screwing Lindsay from marketing. You know Lindsay, right? The blonde girl, always wearing those ridiculous heels." I didn't know Lindsay, or maybe I did. Again, like I mentioned before, faces were pretty hard to place for me sometimes, but the way Tracy was explaining it and telling it to me, this was almost like the scandal of the century, so I had to play along, act like I knew her. Yeah, I think so. So, what happened?" "She lost it," Tracy said, her voice dropping even lower, like full-on meltdown in the parking lot this morning. Screaming, cussing, the whole 9 yards. Security had to get involved. "Seriously?" I said as I shook my head. "What, are we still in high school or something?" "I know, right?" Tracy chuckled. But there was a nervous energy about it. "Anyway, the word is Lindsay and Nicole's husband, what's his name? Evan. They both got sent home. Nicole too. HR's in overdrive trying to clean it all up." As the day went on, that story unraveled in bits and pieces, like it does, passing like a baton between the departments. By the time it finally reached my desk, the tension in the air had thickened completely, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the kind of story that would just end like most of them do. The rest of that day passed in whispers and darting glances across the room. Every conversation that everybody was having seemed to orbit that same event, each version of the story slightly warped by the teller's perspective. By the time I finally clocked out for the day, the office was like a pressure cooker. And for some reason, I still was thinking about the image of Nicole screaming in the parking lot, voice breaking against the concrete walls of the building. I personally really didn't know her well, but I do remember fixing her laptop a few times. She was polite, if not maybe a little distant. But now I couldn't stop wondering what she looked like during the moment of complete unraveling. The next morning, the office was really off. It wasn't the usual awkwardness that followed a big blow-up. It was even deeper. I got to my desk early, booted up my computer, hoping to just lose myself in work. But almost immediately after that, Max from HR appeared in my peripheral vision. He leaned up against the cubicle wall. His face was pale and drawn. "Man," he said, shaking his head. "I'm assuming you heard about what happened." "Let me guess," I replied, not even looking up. "More drama." "Nicole," Max said. The weight of his voice made me pause now, though. I swiveled in my chair to face him. "She disappeared yesterday after that fight in the parking lot. Didn't go home, didn't answer her phone. Her husband, Evan, went looking for her, but..." "Wait," I interrupted. "Evan? Wasn't he the one that was cheating?" Max nodded. Yeah. He left for work early to avoid the fallout. I guess he thought he'd wait for Nicole to cool off and come home." "Okay, so what happened?" Max hesitated, glancing around as if he was afraid somebody might overhear him. "Word is, Evan and Lindsay met up last night, probably to talk things over or through. I don't know, make plans, whatever. Anyway, Nicole found them." The way he said it, it made my stomach drop. "Found them?" "Yeah," Max said, voice barely even above a whisper. "She killed them, both of them." Those words didn't even really register at first. They just kind of hung in the air above me. "What do you mean, killed them?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. She shot Lindsay, Max said, right in the chest, and Evan stabbed him multiple times. Cops found her wandering near the scene covered in blood. I was just staring at Max now, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to crack a grin and admit this was some kind of sick joke, but he never did. Jesus, I muttered, leaning back in my chair. Yeah, Max said. Jesus is right. For the rest of the morning, every time I tried to focus on work, my mind would wander back to Nicole. I pictured her standing over Lindsay and Evan, her hands slick with blood, her face twisted with rage, or maybe grief. I couldn't really decide which was worse. By lunchtime, the entire office was buzzing with the news. Tracy cornered me in the break room, her usual grin replaced by the look of genuine unease. I'm assuming you heard? She said, as if there was any chance I hadn't. Yeah, I said. Max told me earlier. Can you believe it? Tracy said. I mean, I knew she was upset, but she trailed off, shaking her head. Nobody could have seen this coming, I said, even though as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I even believed them. People don't just snap like that, do they? There has to be something simmering beneath the surface, something that builds and builds until it finally explodes. Do you think she'll get the death penalty? Tracy asked. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But I'll admit that thought did linger in my mind. Nicole sitting in a courtroom, her hands cuffed, her face blank, as a judge read her sentence. That felt way too big, too dramatic to be even real. But yet, it was. Lindsay and Evan were both dead, and Nicole was in custody. The rest of us were left to pick up the pieces, to make sense of the senseless. The office was so quiet that day. The only time people spoke, it was in hushed tones, their voices muffled by the thick tension in the air. Occasionally, I would hear snippets of conversation, somebody speculating about Nicole's mental state, or somebody else claiming they knew something was off. They'd known it all along, like everybody always says. Everyone had their opinion, but nobody seemed to have any answers. I was exhausted when I clocked out, not just physically, but emotionally. The weight of that day just pressed down on me, and I could not shake the grief. I felt weird, distant. I'm sure some of you understand exactly what I'm talking about. The next day at the office, it felt like I stepped inside a crime scene. Everything looked the same, the gray cubicles, buzzing fluorescent lights, the faint smell of somebody's reheated curry wafting from the break room. But it was definitely different. There's a weight in the air, a suffocating stillness that made every sound, every click of a keyboard, every cough feel deafening. I clocked in as usual, and the motions were robotic. I made my way to my desk, avoiding eye contact with anybody. Not that anybody was looking. Most people were glued to their monitors or huddled in these small, tense groups, still whispering so low that I don't even know how they heard it. Around mid-morning, I finally got the courage to approach Max. He was hunched over his desk, staring blankly at a screen. Hey, I said, leaning up against the edge of his cubicle. You got any updates? Max looked up and his eyes were bloodshot, and he didn't answer me immediately. He just rubbed the temples of his head, trying to massage the words into existence. Yeah, he finally said. His voice was heavy though. They're saying Nicole's not talking, not to the cops, not to anybody, just sitting in her cell, staring at the wall. I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. What about Lindsay and Evan? Max swallowed hard. The details are all over the news, man. Lindsay was shot point-blank range in the chest and probably didn't even see it coming. Evan, he fought back, and that's why she stabbed him so many times. They found the knife in her car and there was blood everywhere. Jesus, I muttered again. Yeah, Max responded. By the time lunch rolled around, I wasn't hungry, but I went to the break room anyway. The usual group was there, Tracy, Melanie, even a couple of others who rarely even joined us. The table was now crowded. "Did you see the news?" Tracy asked as I sat down. "No, not yet. I haven't really looked." I'd seen some headlines, some grainy photos of Nicole's mugshot, and the blood-slicking driveway where it all gone down. "They're saying she planned it," Tracy said, "that she waited outside Lindsay's house for hours just watching. Can you imagine?" I couldn't, or maybe I just didn't want to. "People snap," Melanie said. "You think you know somebody, but..." She trailed off, just staring at her coffee. The conversation petered out after that. Nobody really had anything left to say, and honestly, I was grateful for it. I finished my coffee and went back to my desk and just tried to lose myself in work. To this day, that was the worst work week of my life. Nothing compares to it. And the craziest thing is that people still talk about it. A lot of us have and will work here for a long time, their entire careers. These people talk in circles like the blood is still warm. And all I can do is just try my best to avoid it. It's said and done. Past is the past. But every time I walk past Nicole's old desk, every time I see that empty chair where Lindsay used to sit, I feel the same grief that I did back then. And from my understanding, she's still in prison. I've had a lot of jobs over the years, but there was something special about that department store that I worked in. It definitely wasn't anything fancy. It was pretty typical. Suburban chain nestled between a discount grocery store and a nail salon, but for me, it was perfect. The hours were steady, the work wasn't demanding, and it was easy to stay on top of the trends since I spent all day surrounded by racks and racks of clothes. But what really made it shine was actually the people. Working retail meant constant socializing, and I thrived on that chatter. Whether it was customers needing advice on what looked good or coworkers griping about the latest markdowns, I was in my element. I took that job pretty seriously too. I wasn't one of those people who punched the clock and did the bare minimum. I volunteered for extra shifts when I could and always tried to help out with the newer hires. Went the extra mile if somebody needed a hand. And that's why on a chilly Wednesday evening, didn't hesitate to offer Thad a ride home. Thad was the latest addition to our retail family. He'd shown up a few weeks back, all shy smiles and polite nods, and there wasn't really anything particularly remarkable about him. Average height, average build, brown hair cropped short. He had one of those faces you forget as soon as you look away, no offense. During orientation, he mentioned he had some retail experience, and he seemed to pick up the ropes pretty quickly. He wasn't the type to joke around or join in on our after-work outings, but he was fine enough during shifts. On this particular night, as we all clocked out, I noticed him lingering near the front doors. While everybody else chatted in groups or hurried to their cars, he seemed at a loss, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, glancing around like he was looking for somebody. I threw my coat on, slung my bag over my shoulder, and figured I'd ask if he was okay. "Hey, everything good, Thad?" I asked. He turned to me startled and then smiled awkwardly. "Oh, yeah, trying to figure out the best way to get home." "You don't drive?" "Nah," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "I just moved here and I'm still working on getting a car. I'm living with my aunt, so it's not too far. Couple of miles maybe." "Where at?" He gave me a pair of crossroads and I frowned. That wasn't exactly close, and all the sidewalks in that area are more decorative than functional. "You're walking all that way?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't mind, it's good exercise." Something about that just didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the idea of somebody walking along those dark, winding streets at night, or maybe it was just the way his shoulders slumped when he said it, like he already regretted the trek. "It's not a big deal, I'll give you a ride," I said, before I could overthink it. His face lit up, a mixture of surprise as well as gratitude. "Oh, are you sure? I don't want to put you out." "It's fine," I assured him. "I go right by there on my way home anyway." He hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Thank you, that's so nice of you." We headed out together, weaving through the rows of parked cars to the employee lot around the back. My little hatchback was wedged between a rusting pickup and Laney's obnoxiously clean sedan. I unlocked the doors with a click and gestured for Thad to hop on in. Looking back now, I wonder what would have happened if I just waved him off, if I let him make that walk alone. But at the time, it really wasn't a big deal, just one coworker helping out another. The drive started out pretty normal. Thad settled into the passenger seat with a polite, "Thank you again for this." And again I waved it off, telling him it's not that big of a deal. We pulled out of the lot, and the faint hum of my car's heater filled up the silence as I turned onto that main road. For that first mile or so, we made the usual small talk, harmless stuff. He asked how long I'd been working at the store, and I told him it had been just over a year now. He mentioned again that he'd done retail back in his hometown, but didn't go into much more detail about where that was exactly. "It's nice here," he said after a while. "Quiet, not like where I'm from." "And where's that again?" I asked. The Midwest," he said vaguely. "Big city, way too crowded for me." I nodded, not pressing any further. Something about his tone made it clear he wasn't looking to elaborate anymore, so I wasn't about to turn a casual conversation into some kind of interrogation. A few minutes later, we passed up a gas station, the bright lights standing against the dark. Thad suddenly perked up, pointing towards it. "Hey, do you mind if we stop for a second? I really need to grab something." I hesitated, glancing at the clock on my dashboard. It was already late, and I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of making any kind of detour, but it didn't feel right to say no in the moment. Sure," I said, flicking on my turn signal. I pulled into the station and rolled up to a stop beside one of the gas pumps, even though I wasn't getting any fuel. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out, turning back to tell me, "I'll be right back." I watched as he disappeared into the store. Left alone now, I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, eyes flitting to the rearview mirror just out of habit. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for one lone pickup parked near the air pump. When Thad returned, he was carrying a small plastic bag that crinkled in his grip. He knocked on the window lightly and I rolled it down, expecting him to hand me the bag. Instead, he gestured toward the ignition. "Can you kill the engine real quick?" he asked. I frowned but did as he asked, confused, but twisted the key until the car fell silent. Thad then stepped around to the driver's side, crouching near the gas tank. It wasn't until I heard the metallic clink of the nozzle being removed from its holster that I realized what he was doing. He was filling up my tank. Startled, I climbed out of the car. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice somewhere between confused and amused. Thad straightened up, glanced at me over his shoulder, and said, "You're doing me a favor, right? Just let me return it." I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. It was a strange gesture, especially for somebody that I barely knew, but at the time it felt harmless, generous even. "Look, you really don't have to do that, I promise," I said eventually. He just shrugged. "It's not a big deal. Gas is cheaper here than it was back home anyway." I stood there awkwardly as he finished up with that rhythmic click of the pump, the only sound between us now. When it was done, he replaced the nozzle and flashed me a quick smile. "All set." "Thanks," I said, still feeling a little off kilter. We both got back into the car and continued that drive, conversation picking right back up where it left off, as if nothing unusual had just happened. By the time I dropped him off, I convinced myself that the whole thing was just a quirky act of kindness, and that I was overthinking it. The next morning, I walked into work to find the store buzzing with tension. My coworkers huddled up in small groups, their voices low and hurried. Laney, who worked in accessories, spotted me as soon as I walked in and rushed over. "Did you hear?" she asked, grabbing my arm. Hear what?" "It's about Thad." My stomach dropped. "What about him?" "He got fired," Lainey said. "Fired?" I repeated, stunned. "Why? He literally just started." Lainey glanced around as if checking to make sure nobody else was listening before leaning in a little bit closer. "Apparently, he told a couple of people in the back room last night that he lit his ex-girlfriend on fire at a gas station." I froze, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "What?" "That's what he said. I know, weird," Lainey insisted. "He just came out with it like it was no big deal. Said he got into an argument with her and then doused her in gasoline and set her on fire. She survived, but barely." I stared at her, my mind racing. "Are you messing with me? That can't be true." "It is," Lainey said grimly. "The manager looked into it after she heard about it and checked it out. He got arrested for it, but I guess he must have made some kind of deal or something because he didn't serve much time, but yeah, it definitely happened." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My thoughts flashed back to the night before, to the gas station, to the moment Thad had filled up my tank. He just stood there, mere feet from me with a nozzle in his hand. That could have easily been me. The realization left me cold, a shiver running down my spine despite the warmth of the store. "I gave him a ride home last night," I said numbly. Lainey's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "He asked me to stop at a gas station too. He pumped gas into my car and I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now..." I trailed off, unable to even finish the thought or my sentence. Lainey looked as horrified as I felt. "You need to tell the manager," she said. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what good that would do. Thad's already gone, fired, and likely out of town. But the thought of what could have happened continued to linger. I couldn't focus for the rest of my shift. My hands were shaking every time I folded up a sweater or rung up a customer. Every corner of that store felt too open, too exposed, as if Thad could reappear at any moment. I knew that was irrational, that he was gone, fired, no longer my problem, but the weight of what I'd learned pressed down upon me, making it hard to even breathe. When my day finally ended, I found myself lingering by the manager's office, hesitant to even knock on the door. What was I going to say? That I'd given him a ride home? That he'd stopped at a gas station, filled up my tank? It felt absurd, like I was overreacting, but then I remembered Lainey's words, the look that was on her face when she told me that Thad had confessed. I knocked lightly. My manager, a no-nonsense woman named Carol, opened up the door. "Yes?" she said, eyeing me with mild impatience. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" I asked her. She then gestured for me to come inside, closing the door behind me. "What's going on? What's this about?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, find my composure. "It's about Thad." Her expression darkened instantly. "What about him?" "I gave him a ride home last night," I began, words fumbling out faster than I could even control. "He said he didn't have a car and that he lived nearby, so I just offered it up. On the way home, he asked me to stop at a gas station and he filled my tank. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now, after what Lainey told me..." Carol's face was unreadable. Her lips were pressed into this thin line. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "Did he say anything to you? Anything about his past?" I shook my head. "No, nothing. He just made small talk, but now that I know..." "You feel like it could have gone differently?" She finished my sentence for me. I nodded, grateful that she understood without me having to actually say it out loud. Carol then sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're not the first one to come to me about this today. A couple of the other girls said he made them uncomfortable too, even before this information came out. I really honestly don't know how something like that slipped through the cracks, but he is gone now, We've notified the authorities, and they're looking into him again." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded along. The thought about the police digging into Thad's past should have comforted me, but it didn't. It just made everything feel a little more real. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thad standing at the gas pump, the nozzle in his hand, his face calm and unbothered. I kept imagining how easily he could have turned and made that moment into something horrific. How close I'd come to becoming another victim inside his twisted story. In the days that followed, life at the store did return to something resembling normalcy, but I never shook that unease that clung to me. One night, after I was locking up after a late shift, I could have swore I saw a figure lingering at the edge of the parking lot. My heart leapt into my throat, but when I turned to get a better look, it was gone. Was it him? Had Thad come back? I'll probably never know. Thad disappeared from my life as quickly as he entered it, leaving nothing behind but this gnawing sense of dread and a story that I'll carry with me forever.